Okay, it's done. Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to you all to the ATOI Adventure Talk series. My name is Sonam Bhutia and I manage the administration for ATOI. Just few things to remember. Like Vinayak sir has already explained that we need to put a mic on mute to ensure there are no disturbance and the meeting is conducted smoothly. And this meeting is being recorded and the summary of the meeting will be shared with all the participants. And our meeting is also being live streamed on Facebook. Live streamed on Facebook. And as a host, I do have the option to put everyone on mute and will be doing so when required. And if you have any questions for Mr. Kingston, please do mention it in the chat box. We'll take it further to be answered later. And now I would request Ms. Dilshad Master, Director, Outward Bound India, Himalaya, to introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sonam. Hi, everyone. Hello, Hugh. How are you?
Dilshad, great to see you. Wonderful to see you.
Great to see you too. I wrote a short little intro for Hugh, for many of you who may not have been privileged enough to have met him. I first heard of Hugh Kingston back in 2018 when ATA, the International Organization for Adventure Travel Trade Association, held its first ever event in India in Bhopal. Typical of an event of this nature, all the foreign adventurers then hooked off into different directions after the event was over to experience India's natural heritage. And Hugh Kingston came with us at MHE to raft down the Ganga with Akshay. And so Akshay walks into the office one day and he says, Hugh Kingston will be joining us. Who? I asked. Yes, Hugh. It was a bizarre conversation straight out of Jaane Bhi Do Yaaro, and I figured we were on very different pages. So I looked up the name on Auntie Google and I met this amazing, amazing personality, a serial adventurer, a passionate environmentalist and speaker, a philanthropist, a TEDx speaker, entrepreneur, writer, the Australian Geographic's Adventurer of the Year, one of Time Magazine's 25 worldwide responsibility pioneers, and top it all off, also a politician. Wow, I thought to myself, ye hui na hero ki entry. And the more I read up on Hugh, the more my curiosity was fueled. This crazy, passionate man has been wandering the world's wildest places for over 30 years, including 25,000 kilometers around Australia and long journeys through the Himalaya on his skis. In 2015, Hugh undertook possibly the most incredible adventure, a 12-month expedition that took him across 14,000 kilometers and 17 country circumnavigations of the Mediterranean by foot, sea, kayak, ocean rowboat, and bike. And he did this to highlight the heart-wrenching plight of innocent children caught up in the conflict of warring zones like Libya and Syria by partnering with Save the Children Australia, a charity organization that he continues to be the ambassador of even today. Hugh is a Welsh name, in case everyone's thinking. And in Old German, I'm told it means heart, mind, inspiration. Sorry, my phone just slipped off. Hang on. So where was I? So Hugh means heart, mind, inspiration. 3 words that define the man affection for the past 3 years. I remember asking Hugh some years back, what makes you do this stuff? Go on these long adventures, be cold, wet, hungry, exhausted for extended periods of time. And he said to me something that helps me ticking along on my journeys. And he said, firstly, it tells me that my creaking and abused joints can still propel me around the place for such a long period without squealing stop. And secondly, it shows me the importance of just getting to the start line and everything else will flow from there. I did say his name meant inspiration, didn't I? Hugh Kingston's battle against single-use plastic is a legendary story of a small little town in New South Wales, Australia, that took the epic decision to ban bottled water. 40 years ago, says Hugh, ordinary water came together with extraordinary plastic to give us single-use bottled water. And the bottled water genie is now well and truly escaped to flood the world. It is perhaps the triumph of marketing over common sense. I would say stupidity, but Hugh is being kind. I remember talking about this with Akshay and Hugh. What if we could do something similar like this in Shivpuri, our rafting capital? Was it even possible? And I, and I remember what Hugh said to me. He said, unless and until all you local businesses and citizens take that first step to ban it, the local municipal corporation will make no effort to clean up the water that comes through your taps. It always starts with you, the people on the ground, to take that first step. I will not say any more about this epic David versus Goliath tale, because I think hearing it directly from Hugh Kingston in his own words will make all the difference. Over the next 1 hour, get ready for one wild ride. Ladies and gentlemen, my privilege and my honor to give you Hugh Kingston in conversation with Vishwas Makhija.
Dilshad, thank you very, very much. And it's very much my privilege and an honor to have been introduced by you, a legend very much as well. Folks, I so wish this wasn't digital. I so wish I was in India. I hear the first snowflakes are falling in the Himalaya this week, and it would lovely to be there. And you know, just as a reminder, just 3 or 4 days ago, I was doing a recce for a mountain bike tour that I'm running next week, and I stayed in an old farm in some shearers' quarters where the sheep shearers used to stay, in a very basic accommodation. And I walked into this room, and one wall was just a huge map of India, and I don't know why it was in the shearers' quarters in this farm in the middle of the snowy mountains, but it was, and it was very apt to be here. I think before, you know, Vishwas and I start having a bit of a chat, I'd like to pay tribute to Akshay Kumar. Many tributes have been paid, obviously, in the year or more that since Akshay tragically passed away. But you know, for me, I didn't know the man that long, you know. But sometimes friendships develop over many, many years and become close friendships. And my relationship with Akshay developed in really the last year or so of his life. And you know, the first thing I did with him was raft on the mighty Ganga, and at the camps on the banks of the river there, we just connected. We laughed, we joked. He had this cheeky sense of humour that maybe I have too, and I really just loved the man's company. And we went from there. We started talking about trips we might do, and I met him again a few months later when I was very honoured to come to the ATOAI conference there in Andhra Pradesh, and to give a keynote a few years ago. And then, you know, the last time I saw Akshay was in his happy place, and I guess my happy place, and that's on skis in Italy, of all places, just before Christmas. And he was a legend of a man, and we became very close in that year. And I know he was a friend and colleague for so many of you here. And yeah, I just want to say he remains in my heart. I just wish I had the opportunity to go down more rivers with Akshay and to tumble down more ski slopes. But alas, it's not to be, but his spirit lives on through you and through beautiful Dilshad and their daughter Sarah. So great man, and thanks.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you so much.
Looks like Vishwas has disappeared. Maybe I'll just do a Q&A with myself.
1 second. No. I'm here. I'm struggling with my, you know, I mean, I had a story this morning with my laptop, so I'm on a new iPad.
Vishwas is speechless for once.
Yeah, thank you. That's right. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to have so many of you joined in for this afternoon here in India, evening in Australia. And it's my utmost pleasure to be chatting up with the legend, which needs no more introduction. I think Dilshad has summed it up in a great way. Welcome to ATOAI community, and everybody's been excited to start and to listen to you. So I guess without losing any more time, we'll get going. Is that great now? Is that good now?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Just to interrupt, Vishwas, your video is probably off by mistake. I guess you don't intend to turn it off.
I can't. Sorry, but Vinayak, I can't even.
Okay. Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, Vishwas, you're audible now, but still the video is off. So yeah, you can carry on.
Well, that's okay. I mean, this is going to be a Q&A between me and you, and then we are happy to possibly take some questions later on if anybody would have it. Sonam is going to keep a track of it. So, I mean, here we start. I mean, who for you, your first trip in India was in 1994, and you said to yourself, never again, And here you are, still 37 years later. So when was the actual beginning of the Indian love affair, which I may put it out in that way. And I remember you once wrote, India is like an old lover. You can't quite get out of your mind. Your thoughts, Hugh?
Yeah, look, like an old lover, you can't quite get out of your mind, and even when you're apart for a long time, you hope that your paths may cross again. And look, and like in many relationships, I think when sometimes you first meet someone, you're not quite sure about them. And certainly when I did go to India in 1984, actually not 94, the first time I was 22 years old, fresh out of university in the UK, my original home, and I had a hell of a time. Everything that can go wrong went wrong in 1984 on my first journey to India, and I got horribly sick. I spent about a week with friends of the family in Lucknow, just being ill. I got on a train to Haridwar, and in 1984, where there was quite a bit of an uprising between the Sikhs and the Hindus, and there was a pitched battle on the train, I remember, with stabbings and so on going on, and I thought, what the hell have I come to in this place? But so I actually left India early and went home to England, went home to mummy, and said I'm never going back to that place again. But 3 years later, I was in Australia. I'd come to Australia for a year at that point in time to have a bit of a look around, and I was working in a ski resort, and a young man came into the lodge that I was working in, and he said, look, we're going to India to try and climb a mountain next year. Why don't you come? And I thought, well, climb a mountain in the Himalaya. I just learned to ski, so why not try and, as my second ski trip after Australia, why not go and do some skiing in India? So I went in 1987 and spent 3 months in Kulu Manali. Initially, we failed miserably on Hanuman Tibba. It was in March. It was far too early in the year. We couldn't get anywhere close up on the mountain, but we had a ball in the Manali region there. And then I just took off ski touring with one of the boys that I was with, one of the Australians, and we skied over Hampton Pass and Rotang into Lahal. And then they all went home, and I thought, I need more of this beautiful country. And I moved on then to Dharamsala, where I just ate apple pie for about 2 weeks and read books. And then I went up to Kashmir and to Gulmarg, and I did some skiing around Gulmarg. And I didn't want to leave the place. And I eventually did, after 3 months or so, went back to the UK, and then pretty much every year for the next 15 years, I found an excuse to come back to India.
So what was the turning point here? Your friend coaxing you back into India, or something else happened on one of the initial trips in '87?
No, I mean it was him coaxing me to go in '87. I had to go, well, I didn't have to go somewhere. I could have flown straight home from Australia to the UK, but it seemed like a great stop off. I was very nervous, but the idea, I think, in '84 when I got sick, I actually didn't. I was heading to the Himalaya to have a look, and I got stuck in Haridwar when I was really ill, so I never saw the Himalaya. So when he gave me the opportunity to go there, and I was a young lad, I'd done a little bit of climbing, I just learned to ski, and the idea of going to India and the Himalaya and having a look and skiing, it sort of overrode my if you like, memories of what happened in '84. And so that was it really. It just gave me that excuse, and by God, I'm glad I took that up. Yeah. And then of course, the passion for me for quite a number of years became the Himalaya, but particularly the Himalaya in winter, and particularly traveling on skis. So went back again in '89 and skied again out of Manali, but we skied over Rotang up to Kailong in Lahaul, over the Baralachala, around to the Kunzumla, went up there. You weren't allowed into Spiti then, so we came back down, went up around, back over Hampton and so on, and just did that, and I think the big one for me, and I was then planning to ski in 1991. 4 of us skied from Kashmir to Manali over 35 days, and a wonderful journey, crossing 5 high passes en route, visiting some villages and monasteries that were obviously cut off for 6 or 8 months of the year, and that developed into one of the best journeys of my life, and one that I still now, 30 years later, I'm very grateful to have undertaken at that time. I think at the time it was the longest ski trip that had been undertaken in the Himalaya, and it was magnificent in every way. And in fact, about 4 or 5 months ago, 3 of the 4 of us who were there was 2, myself and another man, and two women, including my girlfriend at the time, and we had a bit of a reunion 30 years later here in Australia to celebrate what was a magnificent journey back then.
Wow, so inspiring. I think I've read somewhere about your connection and your barber story. Would you want to elaborate and share that with people? Because I think that's a very interesting story. I think you carried on all these years, I think, much because I don't have much here, but I think you can still talk about the barber story.
Look, if you've got it, you flaunt it with hair, I think, and I do tend to flaunt mine a little bit, let it get a bit ragged. But look, as I said, India's given me many things, many friends, many memories, many beautiful places. But what India also taught me was how much I loved street barbers. And so it was the first country in the world for me where I'd actually, because I was going to India at least once a year for a dozen or 15 years, I would always save my haircut for the barber in India, and hopefully maybe a couple of times a year. And then that developed into just loving going to barbers anywhere around the world. And so it had been many years since I'd actually had a haircut in Australia. And one of the terrible things of the pandemic, of course, with the lack of travel for me, is not being able to get my haircut overseas. But I did, just thinking more recently of going to India, when I went to Kashmir in 1991, at the beginning of that journey, or before we started, I was staying on a houseboat on Nagin Lake in Srinagar with the Bajari family, who Gary Weir knows extremely well, and Gary lived on that lake for many years. And before we set off on that long ski tour to Kulu, I had my hair cut by Bashir, the barber, just on the gangway, just outside the houseboat. And 2 years ago, so that was in 1991, and then 2 years ago, I was back in Srinagar, back in Gulmarg for the first time since actually 1987, changed a lot as a ski area since then. And after I'd been skiing up in Gulmarg in 2019, I went back down to Nagin Lake in Srinagar there, stayed on the same houseboat with the Bajaris. And we were just looking at some photographs on the houseboat. And there was one of me being at the Barber 28 years earlier. And Bilal Bajari on the boat said, "Oh, Mr. Hugh, Bashir is still here, he's still here." And he ran off the houseboat, brought Bashir back and sat me in exactly the same place outside the houseboat. And Bashir, who was 18 when he first cut my hair, was 46 in 2019 and gave me the most wonderful haircut once again. So I do love the barbers. And actually I did grab recently, it seemed the right time of now to publish an article on my experiences with barbers around the world. And in one of the magazines that I write for regularly, I'm not sure if you can see, but that's me there in 1991, and that's me there in 2019 with Bashir. We've got both a little older and maybe a little bit wiser.
That's incredible. Yeah. So the barbers never stay away from you, and you never stay away from them. Looks like after all your travels, you know. Great. So we'll just switch gears here. We move to Australia. City to city achievement, joining Australia's capital cities through some of the wildest terrains, covering almost 25,000 kilometers. How did you even conceive this idea? You know, I mean, that is huge.
Look, really, it was city to city, the project, which grew to be 25,000 kilometers around Australia, linking each of the state capitals by the most interesting and challenging human-powered routes, really just grew organically. I decided I'd come back to Australia, actually from Pakistan. I'd done a solo ski tour in the Karakoram across the Biafo Hispar in 1997, and I got back to Australia just before Easter, and I went for a bit of a walk for 2 or 3 days in a beautiful part of the world called the Budawangs, not too far away from where Gary and I live in Bundanoon. And I thought, you know, I'm going to stay in Australia. I'm going to be in Australia all this winter. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and ski the maximum length of the Australian snow country from the most southerly snows, which is sort of east of Melbourne, to the northern part of the Snowy Mountains, not too far from Canberra. And look, I know the Snowy Mountains may not be as extensive as the Himalaya, but it's quite a distance. And I thought, you know, I'll see if I can, you know, how far, you know, if I can ski that route. And as I started on this walk over Easter, thinking about this, I thought, well, maybe I won't just do the ski. Why don't I start in the Central Railway Station in Melbourne? And by a combination of that ski, but also adding in some river paddling and some bushwalking and some mountain biking, why don't I make my way from Melbourne to the Opera House in Sydney? And so I did that journey, including the skiing, which was a pretty epic journey then. And for me, you know, I spent about the whole journey, I think it was 53 days from Melbourne to Sydney, and about 25 days of those were on skis. And for 3 weeks in the Victorian Alps, I didn't see another soul. I mean, it was wonderful to be in the most populous part of Australia, and that in that winter journey for 3 weeks, I didn't see anyone else. And this was, of course, well before the time of mobile phones and, you know, EPIRBs and all that sort of stuff that we're cluttered up with now. So it was a really solid adventure. And I was about 2/3 of the way through that journey to Sydney. And I thought, you know, so often I leave Australia. I'd only moved to Australia about 5 or 6 years beforehand in 1990. I really need to see more of my own country, my adopted country, having, you know, been an immigrant there from the UK. And I thought, this is just a bloody brilliant way to see Australia. So why stop at Melbourne to Sydney? And so the idea developed during Melbourne to Sydney. Let's link all of the state capitals in this fashion. And that grew into those 7 journeys that you know, some of, I think the longest one was 120 days or so between Perth and Darwin, which took in the best rivers, the best mountains, the best deserts, the best coasts. Really was, and the rule I set myself was I can't take any bus, plane, train, ferry along the way. It must all be by human power. And yeah, it was just a wonderful way to see so much of this particular continent, which is a pretty amazing country, you know, with obviously a very small population for the size of the place, so a lot of remote areas. Yeah, it just became a project that grew organically and took me, you know, as I say, there were 7 journeys, and I finally finished Melbourne to Hobart in 2004, paddling into the dock in Hobart there at the end of that sort of, I think there was about 600 days of travel and a bit over 25,000 kilometers of ski, bike, trek, river paddling and sea kayaking.
No, I mean, I think I'm speechless, and I'm sure everybody listening is speechless with these 7 journeys and stitching together these 25,000 kilometers of Australian outback, if I can call it, you know, one way or the other. I mean, we can't even visualize what all adventures and what all exciting moments you went through, you know, but great. This is, I think I'm going to start reading more about this, and this is very, very inspirational. I think it's incredible. Next question, I think, you know, you've been an adventurer, an environmentalist, a writer, and you did do a political jump, you know. I think it's a pause for now, but I'm sure you will continue on that, you know. Now, how did this political jump evolve, you know? And did India play a role one way or the other in your political jump, you know? I know that South India trip during the ATOAI convention in Andhra Pradesh, you did wanted to go kayaking, but I remember when you ended up on the river, there was no water; it was dry. You know. Yes. So I mean, how did this political journey came in being in your thoughts? You know. So.
Yeah. Look. Firstly, I mean, getting to the end of you know, what happened in India, I did not paddle that river. I'd carried this pack raft and all this gear over to Andhra Pradesh, thinking I'd get down this river for a few weeks, but indeed there was no water, just this grassy reed beds down the river. So, and I will say, but all, you know, so often good things come of less good. And there I was, the ATOAI conference had finished, everyone had gone home. I'm standing on the banks of this river with my pack raft and food for a few weeks and nowhere to paddle. And I made a few phone calls to some of the legends around this screen. And one of those people I'd met at the conference was down in Kerala, Jackson Peter, and he said, this message got to me. He said, well, it doesn't matter if there's no water in the river. He ran a scuba diving business. He said, come to Kerala, come to Kovalam, and I'll run a scuba course for you. And I'd never done a scuba course, and I found myself 2 days later in Kovalam, and I was doing a scuba diving course with the entrant for India for the Miss Mermaid competition, who was a Bollywood actress who was off to Egypt to represent India in the Miss Mermaid competition. So she had to learn how to dive, how to swim, including with her fishtail on. And so we did the scuba course. So it turned out to be probably better than paddling down the river that I had in mind. But look, politically, when a few months before I came to the conference there in February 2019, January, I think, in January, I'd actually been skiing at the end of the winter of our winter in 2018. And I came out of the mountains. I've been touring on my own for a few days. And I came out of the mountains and switched on the radio as I was driving home. And our Prime Minister at the time had been dumped, and it was like the 4th or 5th prime minister. I mean, Australia was developing a reputation as the coup capital of the Western world, and we were dumping prime ministers, you know, every year or so. And I got really angry. I got really angry the fact that, you know, there were all these games being played in our political system here in Australia at a time in particular where I was bothered about the lack of work that we were pushing ahead with on the issue of climate change, the whole issue around that dumping of prime ministers of integrity. So I driving back to Bundanoon from the mountains, it was about a 3-hour drive, and I'm just like, you know, more angry than I'd been before in a sort of political process. And I'd never stood at any level for politics. And I started developing this idea that maybe I can't just be angry about it. I live in a democracy that I was starting to get really concerned about, and the way our politicians operated. And maybe I had to make a stand and stand for federal politics. And so that went from there to a few months of thinking about it. I took a few people into my confidence. I talked about it with my beautiful wife, Wendy. But really, it was like, I have a wonderful wife. I don't need to do this. You know, I don't need to put myself through this. But I also have 5 gorgeous grandchildren. And every time I was with those beautiful kids, I think, you know, Hugh, you got to stand up, mate. You got to stand up. And then I was back and forth trying to make the decision. Anyway, I came to India there in January, did the talk at the conference, and around the conference had some conversations with people. Some people I'd known for a while, some people I didn't know well at all, but you know, I'd met at the conference. But then, you know, sometimes it's nice to have conversations about things like my possible political journey with people you hardly know. And I actually there, I think the night after I gave the keynote talk at that conference, I finally made the decision. A few things crystallized there in Andhra Pradesh for me, that I had to do something, and I made the decision to stand for Parliament, to stand in my local seat against our Minister for Energy, and laughingly called emissions reduction. So he was the man who was driving so much of the inaction for Australia on climate change. Someone I knew quite well. He used to compete in some of the big cycling events, mountain bike events I used to run. Someone who probably doesn't talk to me quite as often now as he used to. But so that was, the decision was made in southern India to stand for Parliament. And I basically realized that, look, you know, I wouldn't think twice about giving up 3 or 4 months of my life to go away on a journey, on an expedition. So why would I not think twice about standing up for what I was really a bit irate about, and stand in the political process? And so indeed, I left India after that barber's haircut in Kashmir, because I'd gone up to there from Kerala to have that ski and have that haircut. And I got home to Australia in early February. The election was in May, and I'm like, well, what do you do now? I mean, how do you stand for Parliament? And put the word out a little bit, got myself a campaign manager, started raising some money. And I then, yeah, absolutely, I gave up everything else I was doing for that 3 or 4 months. And it was, I was super nervous. I thought, what am I really getting myself into? There's a lot of nastiness in politics in Australia and probably much of the world. But it was such a worthwhile thing for me to do. It was such a worthwhile thing for my beautiful wife, Wendy, who normally has supported me in some of my silly adventures. She, you know, from afar, from being at home, Wendy, who's not someone who puts herself forward, she got stuck into this campaign like nothing else. It was a wonderful journey for the two of us to go on. I met hundreds and hundreds of incredible people. I met some weird stuff that happened. I had some nasty things done to me by the government or the governing party, but it was still such a a worthwhile thing to do, and I failed. I stood as an independent. Independence in Australia, the system is set for the parties. It's really, really almost impossible without millions of dollars and a massive, massive team to succeed as an independent in our system. But I'm glad I gave it a go. I came third out of the 7 candidates behind the 2 major parties. It was, so India crystallized some things. I'm not quite sure what, but I remember that night in that hotel room in Araku going, this is it, now is the time, now is the decision that I've been prevaricating on for far too long, and that was it.
Great. So are you planning to continue this plunge again in a couple of years, or you parked it for a while?
Well, I parked it, and look, it's funny, you mentioned this today. I just collected from a friend of mine who was a key member of my team. He kept all of the A-frame signboards. We had, dozens and dozens of those and lots of signs, and he wanted to clear out his shed. So I've got just outside me from where I am here in the house is a trailer load of all my banners and signs from the election in 2019, and I'm taking most of those signs to the tip. And I will say to be recycled, because one of the things that I'm very proud of when I did stand for Parliament is that I was the only candidate of 1,500 in Australia who used recyclable cardboard signage and not plastic corflute signage. So at least it can be recycled. There's a bit of me that would like to stand again. Obviously, it's easier second time round. The electorate of 100,000 people knows my face a little bit more than they did. But the pandemic has played a little bit of havoc with that, because Wendy and I were due to have a year in the UK when the pandemic started from April last year. And of course, that couldn't happen. And we're stuck in Australia. We still can't really travel much from here. And I owe it to Wendy to have that year in the UK, in the cottage in the Yorkshire Dales. And the next election is it's somewhere between now and May 2021. We have ridiculous 3-year short terms in Australia. It's a ridiculous too small a time. But I owe it to Wendy to have that year when we can have it. And I've also taken on other projects now, so it's so I'm not standing in the 2021 election, but I'm glad I did in 2019. Whether I do again, well, time will tell.
Well, I think you're very modest. I think as a first timer, you did very, very well, I think, at your end. And that's what I think Gary also wrote in the comment box. You did exceptionally well, coming third ahead of the 2 main political parties. I think that says a lot about you and your efforts. So moving on.
And the wonderful team that I had.
Absolutely. Moving on, I think I want to switch the continent here, I think now. We've been in Australia, we've been in India. You did a year around the Mediterranean, covering 17 countries, 12 months, 13,000 kilometers. I think a sea kayaking for 5 months, ocean rowboat for 2 months, trekking for 3 months, a kayak trip. 3 months length of the length of the European Alps, as you say.
Yep.
Mountain biking for 2 months. What was the message here? The larger message, this is one of the, again, this I can compare with the 25,000 city-to-city adventure you did in Australia, but circumferencing the whole Mediterranean, and this is just another incredible journey of yours.
Yeah, look, look, the Mediterranean trip was, again, quite often there's this organic development of these things. I mean, I had an idea. I don't know where the idea came from, and it probably resulted from too much red wine many years ago, thinking about what trips I could do. Maybe I'd been around a continent, now I needed to go around a sea. Maybe I needed to reconnect with the continent of my birth and my upbringing and so on. I'm really not quite sure, but what really happened for me with the Mediterranean was that as I was I was thinking about this trip, but then I became aware of the centenary of a tragic battle in World War I in Turkey, in a place called Gallipoli. And what happened in Gallipoli was tens and tens of thousands of people died, including 10,000 Australians and New Zealanders. And really it was the first time that Australia and New Zealand had gone to war as independent countries. And we had the centenary, and in Australia, that the Gallipoli commemorations, April the 25th every year, is it's our biggest commemoration every year. It's a public holiday and there's services of commemoration. And when I became aware of the centenary coming around in 2015, that gave me a real link to Australia. Could I start from the beach at Gallipoli in Turkey and circumnavigate the Mediterranean in 12 months to be back in Gallipoli in time for the centenary? So could I leave the day after Anzac Day 2014 and be back there for Anzac Day, the centenary in 2015? So that, started me getting excited about the trip. It had an Australian link, it had a start-finish point for the circumnavigation. And then I thought, well, it was a tragic battle for everyone concerned. I mean, if anyone wins wars, Turkey won that one with the help of the Germans, but 80,000 Turks died. I think quite a number of Indian troops died at Gallipoli too. But I didn't want to glorify in any way war. But as I was planning this journey, the desperate modern tragedy of Syria kicked in, and there were hundreds of thousands of people as I was planning this journey, and millions of people trying to escape the madness of the civil war in Syria. And I decided then during the planning of the journey that what I needed to do was raise, not just have the journey because it was something nice for Hugh Kingston to do, but to use the journey to sort of highlight the issues around the Syrian war, and very much the specific issue of the innocent victims of any war and conflict around the world, whether it's what happened in Rohingya a few years ago and in the Congo, but and that's children. And so I partnered during the planning of the Mediterranean trip with Save the Children, a major global charity, to raise funds specifically for the children who were trying to escape the madness of the civil war in Syria. So I set off with that purpose in mind. It gave me a real added drive for the journey if I needed a drive. I mean, I love those long journeys, obviously, as everyone will be getting an idea of now, but it gave me that real extra purpose to raise that money, and raised a fair bit of money through that journey, through the help of many hundreds of wonderful donors. And of course, as I journeyed around, the Syrian crisis touched me a number of times. On the rowing boat, we were buzzed by the Italian Coast Guard thinking we were smuggling or were refugees trying to escape from North Africa. And the same happened in Turkey in my sea kayak, and I came across a number of refugees leaving there, and at the end of the journey, visited some refugee camps with Save the Children in Greece. So, and subsequent to that, I've continued to work very closely with Save the Children, fundraising and highlighting their work. And yeah, so the Med trip, very different to the Australian trip. If Australia was a lot of remote country, perforce the nature of the continent. In the Mediterranean, it's pretty hard to get away from people anywhere you go around the shores of the Med. And yes, for 2 months I was in an ocean rowing boat with a young Slovenian guy, and we were a long way from shore, so a long way from people. But most of the time, every day or so, I'd certainly be with people. And the Med journey whilst it was a mammoth physical challenge for me then in my early 50s, and kept those creaking bones and joints oiled and moving, but it was inspirational for me from the human kindnesses that were visited upon me time and time and time again. And if I didn't have to come back to my beautiful wife, grandchildren, etc., I would have taken 2 or 3 years to have circumnavigated the Med, because I could have just stayed so long in so many beautiful places with so many amazing people. So another great journey, and one that I consider myself very lucky to have completed. And I honestly couldn't believe it when I paddled back into Gallipoli 363 days after I left in my sea kayak.
Wow. Yeah, I think this is one of the, I think, very special journeys I think you've undertaken, and surely I think that Syrian war and the sufferings of people, I think, surely added a larger purpose to your trip. And I think you went about changing tracks and getting involved and raising money and getting on with the work. I think you mentioned a couple of times about Wendy, your I think your wife and your grandchildren. So how do they cope up with your adventures, or rather, I mean, if I say rather, inspirations because of your adventures, because each adventure you do has a larger message, for the outside world. But what is the message for them as a family,
That's a good question. I mean, I think for Wendy, I'm very lucky. I am incredibly lucky to have the support and love of my beautiful wife, and she understands that these are the things that drive me, and it isn't easy, and I wouldn't ever say it was, and but she's allowed me to do those things, and there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the love that I've had from Wendy for a long period of time has actually given me the strength, even though it's horrible to be apart for those long periods of time. The love that drives me from her and in reverse give me strength. And I've often pondered, if I didn't have that background support, how would I cope on my own in some of those journeys? So very, really super fortunate, to have that. But as I say, not easy. And I'll tell you, when I came back from the Mediterranean, I was away from Australia for 15 months. I saw Wendy once in that time. She came over 4 months into the journey and met me in Croatia when I was sea kayaking up the coast. And of course, yes, with the modern communications, we could talk on, Facebook and things like that, or FaceTime. But we were desperate to be together, and Wendy was on the beach when I paddled in at Gallipoli on the 22nd of April 2015, and it was amazing. But it actually took us probably 6 months from that journey to get back our equilibrium. I mean, Wendy had built her own life in that 15 months here, and she had her things going on, and I'd come back from living like a hobo, pulling up in people's gardens, on beaches, and pitching the tent, sleeping anywhere where I could sleep. And I wanted to sort of keep going like that. I wanted to go and knock on the neighbor's door and see if I could sleep on their porch and things like that. So it wasn't easy for us, then. We'd had those sort of adjustment periods before, but certainly after the Mediterranean trip, which was the longest single period I'd been away, it was a challenge. But the strength of our love kept us working through some of those issues, and all was well in the end. So very lucky there. The grandchildren, Wendy came as a complete package. So I've my 2 stepdaughters through Wendy, and the 5 grandkids who are now aged 8 to 16. Look, they're kids, they recognize some things and don't recognize other. Obviously, when they weren't around when I did the cities to city journeys and stuff in the Himalaya and other things around the world. In the Mediterranean journey, they were much younger then. Of course, that was 6 years ago. But they're the support and some of the messages that those grandkids sent me on the med trip were just incredible and kept me going. In fact, I was hugely upset just about 2 weeks ago. I was clearing, we have a lovely property down in the Snowy Mountains, and I was clearing a lot of bushes and trees to reduce the fire danger. And I had a bracelet, this one, which has various charms on it. And one of the charms that was on it was one that the two of my grandkids gave me at the airport when I flew across to start the Mediterranean trip. And they gave me this little silver charm that had forest leaves on it in a filigree silver. And they said, Papa, they call me Papa, and they said, Papa, whenever you're feeling you need strength, spin the little charm and it'll give you strength. And, you know, back then they were 10 and 8 years old, those two. And there was a few tears at the airport. And I spun that little thing, and I've spun it many times since when I've felt it, I needed strength in the outdoors or in some other things that I've done. And anyway, when I was loading these trees and things into the trailer down on the land in the Snowy Mountains, I ripped my bracelet off, and of the 8 charms that were on the bracelet, the one that disappeared into the bush was the one to give me strength. So I hope it's not a Samson moment of having my hair cut and losing the strength. But look, the kids have been mightily supportive. I feel so sorry in many ways. I'm not sorry, that's probably not the right term to use, but you know, they at the moment through the pandemic, I mean, the people I feel for very much are people between, you know, the age of sort of 13, 14 and their mid-20s who've missed, you know, a year, well, more than a year, probably 18 months, nearly 2 years of their growing up, of making mistakes, making friendships, falling in love, falling out of love, you know, learning the perils of drinking and not drinking and all of those things, and you know, missing out on connection at universities and stuff like that. So I feel for my grandkids in that sense. And of course, I feel for them as possibly the first generation now, anyone from the age of 10 up to 25 who are looking down the barrel of an understood threat to the real future, that we now understand there's a threat to the real future of this planet. And you know, most of us on this gathering here today have enjoyed some wonderful experiences in adventure, in the mountains, in love, in family, but it's a bit of an empty feeling, I think, for a lot of young people looking forward and wondering what sort of world we delivered them. So I hope to God at COP26 next week in Glasgow, something good happens, but let's see.
Great. Continuing on what you just said, I think you have worked a lot to reduce plastic pollution. I think you've been campaigning it for almost 30 years, you know. And I think in 2009, your hometown, Bandanoon, if I can spell it right, was the first place in the world to stop selling bottled water. And then you followed that up with your TED talk in Athens in 2018. You know, I mean, how does all this come to you, and how do you really, get these kind of things to an end result? You know, I mean, to have your town, which is possibly have a lot of tourists coming, and everybody used to certain way of traveling, like it happens in India when you go to touristic places. But you really stuck to what you wanted to do. You know, it's been like the one-man army, you know, trying to work on this plastic problem in your town. You know, a plastic water bottle or single-use plastic. You know.
Yeah. Well, certainly it wasn't a one-man army. I mean, I might have instigated the campaign in our beautiful little town here, Bandanoon, and you said it perfectly there, Vishwas. Oh. And it means place of deep gullies in the indigenous language, place of deep gullies. And Bandanoon sits on the edge of a beautiful national park of forests and gorges that just sits below us, a spectacular place. a very dangerous place. Of course, it's a place from where the bushfires attacked this little town nearly 2 years ago now. And Mr. Weir sitting there, we all remember that night of the 4th of January 2020, and Gary saved his house as the fire came up his garden, and he beat back the fire before the fire brigade could get there. And it was Gary's was an amazing thing what Gary did that night. And but you know, the bush is full of dangers, but we do live in a beautiful place, and it's coming back to life now, nearly 2 years after the fires. But in terms of the bottled water thing, look, I've long campaigned against single-use plastics. I introduced my first campaigns in 1991 when I was the marketing manager at a chain of outdoor adventure stores here in Australia. But here in Bundanoon, you know, we actually had a campaign in town against a company that wanted to drill on the edge of the national park to mine water, and that's what it is, mine water from the ground, to suck it out of the ground, ship it in big trucks to Sydney and stick it in plastic bottles and sell it. And so we had a campaign against that, of which I was part. And during that campaign, I just posited the idea in our town magazine that, you know, if we didn't want this water mine in our town, then maybe our shops and cafes and events just shouldn't have the end product in town. It was quite simple. Did Bundanoon have the bottle to get rid of bottled water? And I wrote that article in the mag in 2009, and a few people got in touch after reading that and said, "Oh, Hugh, you know, I like the idea. How do we do it?" And we formed a little group of amazing characters. There were researchers, there were graphic designers, there were local business people. And at the time, I actually owned a cafe and bike shop in Bundanoon. And so I wasn't some greenie in town saying, businesses, you need to stop selling this and stop selling that. I was one of the businesses in town. And so, you know, we developed the idea of, you know, could we get rid of bottled water? And of course we could, because 40 years ago, bottled water didn't exist and nobody needed it then and nobody needs it now. And so we looked at what we could do, which was getting the water fountains that we all had, the taps, the bubblers, the drinking fountains into town, having reusable bottles available in town that people could buy. Bundanoon is a tourist town. We make a lot of our money because of the national park and the beautiful environment in which we live. So, you know, it was maybe, you know, would put Bundanoon a little bit even more on the map. And so we had all of these ideas, but you know, at the end of the day, we were asking businesses to take away revenue, and it's never easy in any small business to lose any sort of revenue. But the businesses came on board. We're a small town, so we're talking about 12 or 15 businesses that we needed to convince, and some were easy to convince, others were harder. And we moved forward with the idea. And look, I think, you know, as far as what happened in 2009, we knew there was a nice story there for the local media, maybe the state media, but we moved towards having a town meeting where we said, you know, we're going to present these ideas to the town and have a vote on whether we're going to go bottled water free. And that morning of the town meeting in July 2009, the Sydney Morning Herald published a story on their front page about Bundanoon planning to go bottled water free. And I think I received my first phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And then it was absolutely insane for days and days. And I did more than 200 interviews in 2 days with everyone from CNN, the BBC, the Times of India, Kazakhstan Times, the New York Times. Everybody had picked up on this David and Goliath battle. And we actually went to that town. Of course, a lot of this was happening before we even had the meeting, before we decided to go bottled water free. And I hope to God that when we got to the meeting that somebody would be there and that the vote would go in our favour. And it turned out to be, at the time, the biggest town meeting ever held in Bundanoon, and overwhelmingly by 355 votes in favour to 1 against, we voted to go bottled water free. But this became this huge international story of the little town not doing it through government, not doing it through legislation, but voluntarily saying, we don't want this product in our town anymore, let's get rid of it. And so we got, because of this coverage, we then had all this profile. On the same day, the New South Wales government announced they were going to get rid of bottled water. And it just was a crazy, crazy time, but a good time. And then we moved, after that vote, we got all of these offers of water fountains and reusable bottles. And we sorted the wheat from the chaff. And we went bottled water free on September the 26th, 2009, got rid of the last bottles. We had a big celebration again in town, a huge bit of media coverage. And the last bottles of water left the shelves in our shops and cafes on that day. And here we are 11 years later. We had a big party on the 10th anniversary, still proudly bottled water free. Done our own little bit, I suppose, in the fight before it was fashionable to fight against single-use plastics. And I guess, I've spent a lot of time working with communities in different parts of the world on the same issue of particularly bottled water. Helped the first American town to get rid of bottled water, helped a lot of other communities and companies and universities and whatever. So it was amazing, but amazing people in this little town that did what they did then, the little mouse that roared in 2009 that stuck it up, the big multinationals who are still pushing this evil product around, and for which there is no real purpose, particularly in a country like Australia. And even in a country like India, where if a lot of all this money that's being spent on bottled water, if the investment was made in purification of drinking water supplies, instead of just allowing the corporations to make billions when it could be the municipalities, the governments investing the money in improving the water. But of course, the incentive to improve the drinking water in some parts of places like India is not there for the government, because they go, well, people can drink bottled water. But then that just creates this massive, massive waste stream of plastic that rolls down the rivers and into the ocean.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think we need a Hugh Kingston in every city in this country, because yes, the plastic bottle, the bottled water is a huge problem for us. And I think especially we as a community, or the adventure travel community, we've been working very hard last several years to put this message out and to work on this ever increasing problem, But yes, I'm sure your story is going to inspire a lot of people here on no single-use plastic, and how one thought can create a big change. As you said, it's been 10 years now. I mean, this is just amazing feat into a tourist hub. I think this example can be surely multiplied as long as there is a sincere effort from the local communities across India. Now, continuing on the same thought, you had mentioned once, I think in one of your articles, that India was the contributor of one of the largest contributors of plastic waste around the world, And we know that our Prime Minister had announced that India would be plastic-free, single-use plastic-free by 2022. Now I do feel that we are far away from it, but I mean, the closing remarks on this thought, this particular question about India.
Yeah, look, I think, India is obviously one of the largest contributors to the plastic waste, but India is also soon to become the largest population in the world. So, it's hardly surprising. But look, I think what Modi did a few years ago to announce that he would be going plastic free was, at least it was an announcement. It was better than what many other governments around the world, including my own, have done here in Australia. Now, it's a huge challenge to do that in Australia. In India, it's a huge challenge to do that in Australia. I know many great people in India who have been making their own, campaigns. I mean, you look at some of those beach cleanups over in in Mumbai and many other parts of the coast, and the plastic reduction campaigns that are happening all around India. Ultimately, though, it isn't government. Ultimately, it's just you and me and everyone on this screen who decides, I don't want these things, or I only want 10% of this stuff in my life anymore. I don't need bottled water. I don't need a plastic bag when I go shopping. All of these things will only ever be solved by ourselves, and not to be led into this dreamland that we can recycle our way out of the problem, because we will never recycle the amounts of plastic that we've already created. We just never will. And I think recycling, I say, is the refuge of the non-committed, and people use it as an excuse. And sure, it's important to recycle stuff, but you can't. You can recycle things in plastic a couple of times and then it's useless. So it's ultimately only about everybody on this screen saying, I've had enough. I don't need it. My business doesn't need it. We need some of it for sure. We need, I paddle plastic kayaks, don't I? We need some of it. This single-use stuff where we go and buy a beard trimmer back to the barbers, and the beard trimmer is wrapped in plastic, and I open it and bang, the plastic goes in the bin. We don't need that stuff. There's other options for us. So look, India's got a massive challenge. The world's got a massive challenge, but really it's you, me, and the 1.4 billion Indians will decide whether we get rid of this problem or not.
Yeah, very rightly said, and very wise words, as always. Yeah, I think we are all, as a community here, are working towards it, but surely we have our challenges. As the issue, I think, at the grassroots level is about revenue, and revenue generations, and especially in far off places. But I think we, at ATOI, we are sanitizing as much as we can the local communities, our local partners, local suppliers all around, to see how progress can be made on this. So
yeah. And of course, the pandemic hasn't helped the fight with the masks and the medical gowns and the refusal of people to use cafes to only do takeaways and things like that. So certainly that's not helped. Hopefully that'll be a temporary thing.
Yes. Okay. I think we are almost getting close to our chat. So beyond the pandemic, what are your thoughts for the travel industry and the travelers? Quickly.
Look, the pandemic, I think, has given, it's been a challenging time for everybody, and the adventure travel industry worldwide massively impacted. And I feel for many people here, whose businesses have basically just gone into hibernation over the last 2 years. Obviously, in this time, if you look at the positives, many of the places that we love have had a rest. They had a bit of a rest, and they've, not had us tramping all over them and camping on them and things like that. So they've had a rest. And I think many of us have had quite a long rest and a time to think about how we want to, live our lives and run our businesses as well. So it isn't easy, because the dollar and the rupee is important to make the world go round, and how we find models that don't destroy the world. But I think this is a chance, and I know, talking to businesses here and internationally, who've taken the pandemic, despite its difficulties, and looked at new ways of doing things that are, tourism is a voracious beast that just can eat up everything. And I think there's a pretty solid chance that, with organizations like the ATOIA driving it, that make businesses leaner and greener and more respectful for those places that we love and the resources that we use, from those places. So there's a lot of negatives to the pandemic. You know, it's a journey that we've still got a fair way to go on, I think, yet. But I think there's some positives for us as individuals. And I think maybe, again, in the adventure travel world, looking at, you know, that people will have, I hope, a longer standing now appreciation of what this tiny but fairly damaged little planet offers and what they can do in their own travel and their own adventuring to lessen the impact of it.
Wonderful, thank you. You know, before we all let you go, I mean, on my Q&A at least for now, you know, I want to quote one of your lines where you have said, you know, or you have always believed in standing up and not standing back, you know. And I think you're speaking to the ATOI members here. And so what is your message exactly here for this community which is watching you now, you know, standing up and not standing back?
Look, I don't think I can advise, you know, such a bunch of legends who are, you know, on the screen here now. I mean, there's amazing work that so many of you have been doing for so many years in your own way. It really is. I mean, that statement, you know, for me is a personal thing. You know, standing up and not standing back because I've been incredibly fortunate. I've been incredibly fortunate, generally speaking, with health. I've been incredibly fortunate to have these amazing experiences. And you know, yes, we make a lot of our own luck and the things that we drive, but I consider myself one of the luckiest people in the world to have gone to some of these amazing mountains and rivers and deserts and whatever, to have met incredible people, to have been very lucky in love, and so on and so forth. And it would just be, and you could say, you know, like many of us, I've been reasonably selfish at times to do the things that I want to do. And so just for me personally, you know, if there's something that I think I can do something about, whether it's in a tiny way, just raise some money for Save the Children, if it's to just stand up rail against a government that doesn't stand up against climate change, that's burying integrity, then it's something that I personally can do and give some energy to. And so I don't think it's something I would advise. It's something that I live by a little bit. I make lots of mistakes. I don't stand up at certain times and say the right thing that we do, but I always have it in the back of my mind as, you know, just you know, do what you think is right, and try and do a tiny bit of good along the way if you can.
Fantastic. That's a great message, I think. I think last question, possibly not a question, but what's your current project? What's happening next? You know, I did read something about you writing a book on your Australian adventures and fundraising for Save the Children and trying to save the indigenous people in Australia, I think, you know. I mean, is that keeping you occupied now, or?
Well, yeah, there's a few things. I mean, in the very near future, next week, I'm taking a group mountain biking, 10 people. It's a group that booked to come with me to New Zealand. A trip that's now been cancelled 5 times during the pandemic, and we've given up on New Zealand, and we're going to have a week mountain biking from the snowy mountains to the coast next week. So still doing that sort of thing. But yeah, look, in terms of a book, I was actually asked to do 2 books fairly recently. One was a book on rivers around the world, and the wonders of rivers, the damage that we've done to rivers, the worship, some of the rivers that we worship, and so on and so forth. But that particular book is a little bit hard to write when you can't travel to some of those rivers. So then I was recently, a few months ago, approached by a publisher here in Australia to do a book on Australian adventures. So everything from sea kayaking to river paddling, all the things I love: skiing, trekking, canyoning, climbing. I don't know if I could call myself a climber anymore, but all of those things I love. So it's basically a bit of a celebration of some of these experiences that you can have around Australia. And what I decided to do with that, it's sort of linked, but I guess it's just not in any real practical sense, but I just like the idea is that here in Australia, our incredible Indigenous people, our First Nations people, the longest continual civilization, ongoing in the world for some 60,000 years or so. As obviously many here today will understand, we have issues that we've created since we invaded this country, or the Western people invaded this country 250 years ago. And one of those issues is schooling for our Indigenous children, and attendance and literacy and numeracy rates are way lower than we have for Australian non-Indigenous populations here in Australia. So Save the Children have a global program based out of Australia called Library for All, which is basically writing books for kids around the world to improve literacy rates. And it's a very successful program. And they've recently launched a thing called ATOAI, which is a series of books, ultimately about 500, which are books written by Indigenous people for Indigenous children about stories that they relate to, not about what happened in Gallipoli in 2015, but their own Dreamtime stories, their own songlines, their own country. So I've just taken it upon myself to set a target to raise a fair bit of money to contribute to this program of books for Indigenous children here. And I quite liked it because most of my work now is as a writer. So it's the written word. Many of the things that I enjoy and the things that this book is about are adventures around this amazing country, this country upon which our First Nations people have spent, tens of thousands of years. So it seemed quite a nice link to sort of link this element of fundraising with this particular book.
Wow, can't wait to get hold of one as soon as it's out too. I mean, this is so inspiring and this is just incredible. I'm sure, there are so many more pages to unfold talking to you, but we have limited time today, but thank you for giving ATOI members an opportunity for sharing all your journeys, all your thoughts about single-use plastic, about the journey in your town, about all the adventures you've done, and especially the barber story, which is just incredible, to be very, very honest, and finding the same guy after 30 years plus, on the on the Nagin Lake, on the deck,
I'm coming back to India soon to get a haircut and to see you guys and to celebrate the wonders that India offers. And it's an honor again to chat to you all, and but it'll be even better when we do it face to face, hopefully sometime soon.
Absolutely, we'll definitely look forward to that. So I'm going to open the house for a quick Q&A before we let you go. Vinay, can you take this over quickly and then do a vote of thanks?
Thank you, Vishwas. Sonam, do you have already a list of questions? As far as I could monitor it, I don't see any questions. Sonam, if you have, please let us know.
There aren't any.
There aren't any. Okay, good. Everything is very crystal clear. Yes, Ajit.
Thank you so much for an inspirational talk. A quick question. You are an Indophile, and you've done a lot of adventures here in India. What advice would you have for adventure tourism in India? What direction should we take post-pandemic? You've seen what we have, and our adventure tourism situation really well. So what advice would you have for us? Thank you.
Thanks, Ajit. Look, I don't particularly like giving advice to experts such as yourselves, but look, I think, and Vishwas and I were talking about this a few days ago, you know, the challenges for the adventure travel industry in India as roads push ever further into more remote places and developments happen, whether they be dam building or whatever, you know, challenges there. But I think one thing that the industry can potentially do, and I accept it's very difficult. I remember that time when I paddled down the Ganga with Akshay back in the end of 2018, and you know, he told me that there was something like 400 operators on the Ganga in that Rishikesh area, and quite a large number of those were sort of one raft operators with no licensing and no risk management and so on and so forth. Now, I don't know whether the pandemic has made it harder or easier for some of the less professional operators to continue to work. You guys would know that, but is this an opportunity to, you know, on the back of the likes of ATOAI to go forward and say, you know, we need to make sure that the people who are operating have strong environmental credentials, they care for country as much as they care for clients, and they care more for country and clients than they do for the mighty rupee. So, you know, whether or not that is an opportunity as you move back into operating again, you know, throughout India with adventure tourism.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Mandy.
Yeah, Hugh, that was wonderful as always. I just heard that you were doing a visit to COP26. So are there any particular things that you're hoping to highlight in terms of climate and tourism or some such? Just a quick sort of insight into that.
I'm not visiting COP26. I'm not sure where you got that from. I'd like to, of course, if I could, but no, I'm not.
I thought you were going.
I just hope, you know, I honestly see this as the last chance. The last chance.
Yeah.
And so I heard Boris Johnson today say he was a bit worried they might not be able to get it across the line. Hopefully he's not softening us up for a failure, but I just hope to God we move forward with big stuff from COP26. But I'm not massively optimistic. But no, I'm not flying over there to rattle the cage in Glasgow.
Okay.
Guys, I'll probably take, you know, it's 7 o'clock here. Some of you are probably starving. It's beer o'clock here. It's actually an hour ago it was beer o'clock, and I've been a very good boy and only had a glass of water. So it's probably time that you disappeared back to your offices and your lunches and your families and so on. And yeah.
Wonderful, Lou. Thank you. Vinay, can you do the vote of thanks and we can sign off?
Sure, Vishwas. Sure. Thank you, Vishwas. Thank you, Hugh. Overwhelming to say the least. I feel we do look forward to more from you in the future. I mean, we have done quite a few adventure talks in the last 1 year or so, and this one really has raised the bar even higher, and I'm sure everybody would agree. I remember I first met you in Bhopal a few years ago. We ended up chatting for a long time over the lunch. And then we had you with us for a good 3 days in Araku talking about your adventures and various other topics. And here we have you today again doing this talk with you. Some of the stories I was aware, and of course there were many new ones for me as well. And I must admit, and I must say that it never gets boring to listen to your stories and your adventures. So thank you for that. After listening to you, I feel, and I can sense, and I can say for most of us over here, that we all are so charged to take up our next adventure or to jump into the next possible responsible action towards, or our responsibility towards the Mother Nature. Your knowledge, your experience, your excitement towards future adventures is just unmatched, I would say. Thank you, Hugh. We have been honored to have you on our Adventure Talk series, and I would request all to give a big round of applause for Hugh. Thank you. And I will also need to thank the audience here. A big thank you to all of you who attended this talk today, whether it's on Zoom here or on our various social media handles. Thank you for taking out time from your busy schedules to attend this. Thank you to Faith, a trade body, and all our fellow national and regional trade associations for helping us spread the word. A big thank you to our friends in the media who really helped us to multiply our reach. Thank you to our president, Mr. Vishwas Makhija, as well, for always being on top of things, for always guiding us whenever we are stuck somewhere. He has been always keeping us all positive. As huge credit goes to him to keep the Adventure Talk series live, even though the lockdown days are over and people have started to get busy for good, of course. So thank you, Vishwas, for that. Thank you to our wonderful team in the Secretariat, Sonam, Rekha, Sonali, Vivek, Pawan. Without each one of you, this was not possible. Any of our events, whether physical or virtual, are never possible. And yeah, last but not the least, in case I missed someone, my apologies, please. Big round of applause for Hugh and ATOI, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gary, for joining us. And thanks everyone who joined in. Have a great day ahead. And
Yeah.
you can go back to your beers now.
Thanks, guys. Good luck with everything. See you soon.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. 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 Bye.